17-year-old who had committed suicide. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when she finished her presentation. But more importantly, she said at the end of her presentation, "This is the first time I've been able to talk about it and express my feelings about this experience." That made the whole adventure worthwhile in and of itself. The second time we used a backpack journalist was at one of our camps. The Army Reserve sponsors camps every year for Army Reserve youth. We did 16 this year, and at one of those camps we offered the backpack journalist as one of the opportunities that the kids could share during their camp experience. Most recently, we used the backpack journalist in our Youth Leadership Education and Development Summit that we held in Boston, and I won't talk very much about that. I'll let the kids talk to you themselves about that experience. One of the things that we hope to do in the future is to use a backpack journalist in one of our new initiatives in the Army Reserve Child, Youth, and School Services program. Is what we refer to as weekend camps and school break camps. This will be an opportunity for children to come for a weekend and or a full week while they're out of school to focus in on these particular skills, particularly those kids who already have an interest in photography, in poetry and writing, and to hone those skills and take those skills back to their community, take those skills back to their schools, particularly those kids who may be serving on the yearbook committee or who may be on the school newspaper, so they could come in and hone those skills over a weekend or during a week and take those skills back to their schools. In closing, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank AUSA and particularly Sylvia Kidd because AUSA were the sponsors for the Army Reserve Teen Panel Backpack Journalists backpacks, and I have a sample of the backpack that they provided, so I wanted to thank them. And in closing, I just wanted to say that I'm always amazed about the openness and adaptability of military children, about their depth and their character and their caring spirit. And through my experiences with a backpack journalist, I've come to see how phenomenal they are. But through their efforts in backpack journalists, I've been able to see tangible illustrations of what we've been trying to define for some time: resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Young. And now we'll have Ms. Marin speak to us.
Okay, thank you. I'm the last one. Okay, we're on the home stretch, but it's been so riveting this morning. And I want to first of all thank the academics who are on the panel with us today. You know, you can choose to do your research in many places, and the fact that you're choosing to focus on our families and help us figure out what we're doing, I really appreciate it. And Ms. Young, to show the imagination and innovation that goes into the programs that you're doing with backpack journalism, I thank you also, and I just want to give you one more thing. I think some of you noticed I brought somebody up with me because I'm going to talk about Give a Hug. If you could see the beautiful face, this is the beautiful face of my son, who I had a Give a Hug doll while he was deployed last year. He came back in May safely, and it just goes to show even 55-year-old moms need to have a Give a Hug dog too. So Brandon's going to be up here with me this morning. So we have access to all of this wonderful information. And as you know, the Army, I'm very proud to be part of the Army. And the Army is a learning organization, and we adapt. And actually, AUSA, as you know, if you see on a lot of the signs around here, what is this convention? This convention is a professional leadership forum. And all of you are leaders. Many of you are spouse leaders, family readiness group leaders. You may be leaders of programs, but you are in the Army family and you are Army leaders. So I hope what you'll take today and all the days that you're here is what you're learning, you know, from our partners, what you're learning with what I may say this morning, and you share it. Because the 1,300 people, including our friends in the overflow room, you have an ability that then to go out on Thursday or Friday when you go back to your camps, post stations, or homes or countries, and you have the ability to take this information and multiply it out hundreds of times. And so I would invite you to do that with this information today. As I said, the Army's a learning organization. I think those of you who've heard me speak before know that I've said that we're in a historic time in our country. As many of you know, we're in the 10th year right now of this particular conflict. It is the longest war that America has been in with an all-volunteer force. So we're learning, we're still learning, and the kinds of studies that we have, the input that we get from you, we always have to be listening and learning, and we have to be agile enough to adjust our programs to this learning. But we can't, there's not one day, and I tell my staff this, it's not one day, not even 1 minute, that we can sit there and say, this is the perfect nirvana moment, that everything is right and perfect in all of our programs. Because of course they're not. And it's forums like this and your engagement with us that will help us make it better. But today what I'm going to get to share with you is really to kind of bring some closure to all of the very thought-provoking things that we've heard here today. So what are you doing about it on the Department of the Army level and in service provision? And how are we taking what we're learning and informing our programs? And so that's really what I'm going to talk about this morning with you. Next slide. Next slide. I take slides to be suggestions, so you have to be, halfway between what Shelley does with no slides. Mine are suggestions. You've heard, of course, from the colleagues up here this morning. There is a couple on the next slide. That was just a summary of them. But if you go to the next slide, I'd like to add a couple of more things that we've learned in other kinds of studies. There's one called Ready, Willing, and Unable to Serve by and it was put on by some retired military officers and concerned leaders as a study, and they have found that 75% of the young adults in America are really not even qualified to join the military. 75%. And why is that? That is because of 3 major areas, and inadequate education, a criminal background, and weight problems. And we talk about that because in some ways our own children are a mirror of society, and our own children are dealing with things that increase stress through deployments. And so some of our programs address these issues here. Also, our Vice Chief Staff of the Army, he asked the Provost Marshal of the Army to take a statistical study of the correlation of crime statistics, juvenile crime statistics, on our camps, posts, and stations, and correlate it to participation in youth services and youth programs and programs like 4-H. And we found a statistical correlation that the more that children participated in the sports and all the other youth services available, the less they were engaged in juvenile crime statistics on the installation. So it's things like that that give us sort of an azimuth check. Also, an additional RAND study has talked about families experiencing a total cumulative effect of deployment, and I believe it was 19 months was where you start to see significant changes in the child. And I don't mean 19 months in a row, cumulatively 19 months over their childhood. That's where you start to see a statistical change in inability to cope. So those are kinds of information for our caregivers and for our service providers that we begin to know where then to focus some of our resources. Next slide. Blue Star Families. Blue Star Families has a very, very recent survey that we're just beginning to digest and look at and give azimuth checks with our programs. And they say that 66% of the families, and this was fairly encouraging actually, are confident that their children's school is responsive to the unique needs of the military family lifestyle. So the efforts of MSEC, the efforts of our own school liaison officers seem to be paying off, but it's still only 66%. So a third do not. And clearly, so we have a lot of work to go. 33% have sought counseling, for themselves or their children. And so that echoes what we're hearing. And the good news is 33% are seeking counseling. Okay, I find that heartening. But 71%, still almost 3/4, report that they need additional help during deployment. And that's what we're paying attention to in our programs. The next slide. What we see here, and you probably can't, and I'll just tell you very quickly, this is when we went out to surveys of families, and we were asking them, to what extent does providing child youth services in Army installations have a positive impact on your lives in the different areas? And essentially, we're finding those are very high numbers in there. The only one that's low is the impact that it has on my decision to stay in the Army. And even that, it's about 67% of the people said it even impacts my decision to stay in the Army. But the others that you see hovering in the 80s, what those are, the positive impacts, is that we really believe that it sends a message that the Army cares about us. And as you'll recall yesterday, if you were here, that's what General Casey said is really what the Army Family Covenant is all about, is that messages that we care. And the good news is 87% of our families and soldiers told us that the Child and Youth Services help to give that message. Also, they tell us that it does minimize lost duty days, the Child and Youth Services program, and it does have a positive effect on their, the growth and development of their children. Now, is it perfect? No. Can we get it better? Absolutely. But this tells us we're getting in the right direction. The next slide. So what about some of the programs? By far, and I've gone out personally and spoken to many groups, and by far one of the most overwhelmingly positive response I get from you is about our respite care, about the give parents a break and the 16 hours of free child care during a deployment and before and after the deployment. But why are we doing it? Okay, why are we doing it? It's not just something, just to kind of be nice. We have the evidence that the better that the parent is doing, and this is intuitive. We all know that when mama's happy, everyone's happy, right? And so this, following along that, if mama has times, or daddy, when he's home, has time to actually take care of themselves, as Shelley talked about, or Sheila Casey talked about yesterday, if you have time to do that, then you are going to have an ability to be a better parent. And also, I know it's called Give Parents a Break, but I kind of think of it as give children a break too, right? Because we're not always our very most illustrious selves when we're under stress. And so they can be in a positive environment with constructive kinds of activities, and so that gives them a break too. So that's why we do it. Now, is it going to have a long-term cumulative effect, a positive effect on mitigating the stress? That's what further academics research will help us with. We've got you covered. What that is basically speaks to increased mission requirements and whether we're meeting the needs in the community, and that's why we have extended hours, and we're even putting some 24-hour child care centers out there. And we don't just meet those needs, as you know, I know, we don't just meet those needs in the fixed facility of the Child and Youth Center. We have family care homes. We bring child care out into other activities, even into fitness centers. Next slide. Army Strong Beginnings, pre-K. We have started with this particular program, and as you can see, we have it in 80 garrisons, and it started in school year 9, so it's been out there. This is becoming the 3rd year that it's been out there, and this is where we focus on pre-K children in their pre-academics of reading, writing, math, science, and social studies. We have found that with the effects of multiple deployments and the very transitional military lifestyle, that we need to give augmentation in the academic skills areas, and the sooner and the better. And this is also to give the parent who stays behind some sort of someone on their team, you know, to sit there and help them provide these skills to their children. Now, what we are now going to be looking at is starting to get feedback from the customers, and eventually we'll be able to see from the academic research with whether this is starting to make a difference. By the way, how many of you had heard of this program? Okay, wonderful. I always look at the glass half full. And even though that was very few of you, now all of you have heard of it, okay? And if you just go out there and tell 3 people about it, 3,000 people will know about it. And that would make me very happy, and all of us. The next slide. We heard some very compelling evidence about the effects of 4-H clubs. Did you know that? You know, I found that very compelling. Did you know that Child and Youth Services has a robust relationship with 4-H clubs and Boys and Girls Clubs? For we have over 340 4-H clubs across the Army. And we heard that it gives higher levels of positive youth development, lower levels of depression and risk and at-risk behaviors, and better grades if they're engaged in this. And it is out there in your camps, posts, and stations. We also have a robust relationship with the Boys and Girls Club. One of the RAND studies that, actually I think it was the Army War College studies, told us that young female adolescents have a harder time with reintegration than their brothers do. Not necessarily surprising for those of us who have had the challenge of raising daughters. And so we actually, part of Boys and Girls Club, which is probably one of our most popular pieces of this, is something called Smart Girls. And Smart Girls is really about helping to build those resiliency skills, but also talks a lot about bullying and some of the more difficult sides of life. And they also have on-school tutor support. So now, in 2 or 3 days, 3,000 more people can know about this program if you tell them about it. The next slide. Character counts. Now, character counts may be relatively transparent to you. That's okay, because this is a program where we teach all of our providers, our child and youth providers. One of the wonderful things, and I was talking to a young lady who works for Senator Boxer today at the congressional breakfast, and I was telling her why it's been such a joy for me to work for the Army since 1986, even though I'm just kind of a civilian girl from California. And one of it is because I love working for a values-based organization that puts so much evidence on leadership. So why wouldn't we realize that that can be inculcated in our youth programs? So the Josephson Institute, which is a renowned institute, put together a program called Character Counts. And the Boys and Girls Clubs use it of America. And what it does, it emphasizes the 6 pillars of character that mirror the Army values, which are trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. And what you might not know is that your youth sports coordinator out at your camps, posts, and station, your coaches, that the people in your child development centers, they have been schooled in this, and they have been taught how to inculcate that in all of their interactions and all of their programs with our children. So this has also been informed by our research. Child, youth, sports, and fitness. We've found in many studies, including the most recent War College study, and I think as parents we intuitively know this, that children who are engaged in sports, getting that physical activity out, they just tend to do better in coping with stress. And youth sports programs are probably one of the most widely used in the youth center, and we've had over 59,000 children this year participate. And as you know, we do give some discounts and some free classes to help during deployment. The next slide. Many of you know that we've invested, and we talked about yesterday, a lot more resources through Army Family Covenant. One of the things that we've done is we bought 199 buses so that we can get kids that can't easily get to these centers, and so that they have an ability to reach our services. We got We did this because we got feedback from you in surveys saying, you got a lot of great programs, but I can't get them there. And so we bought buses for that. We've already talked a lot about the need for increasing capability in behavioral health in child and youth. So we have military family life consultants, we have child behavior consultants, and we have opened 124, we are opening 124 new child development centers and youth centers. And I know that we still have work to do in process and registration processes, and we're working on standardization as we go across. But I'd like to tell you that an independent accredited agency has said that the Army is a leader, as we are in many things, but we are a leader in child development, and that our centers are world class. Now we can make them even better by listening to your feedback. The next slide. We've also invested heavily through Army Family Covenant resources into school support services with increases in school liaison officers. I think many of you have heard of the Interstate School Compact. 36 states, which accounts for 85% of our impacted children, have signed up to a number of principles that when you move from state to state, that there are going to be some commonalities in how your children's credentialing is dealt with, how they go into gifted and talented classes. For example, if they had to take Texas history in 10th grade, but they wind up in Virginia when they, excuse me, Virginia is a bad example, but they end up in Washington and they're supposed to take Washington state history to be able to graduate, that the Texas state history would be okay. And that's the kind of thing in Interstate School Compact. Tutor.com, how many of you have heard of Tutor.com? About half? Okay, so that means 750 people haven't heard about it. I'm going to tell you to tell 4 people about this, okay? Because I want a lot of people. Did you know that there is now an ability of a 24/7 online tutoring capability that your children can take advantage of? And it's live, it's one-on-one, it's available 24/7, and as you know, our children are very savvy about working in a virtual environment, okay? And so the tutor.com in a virtual environment is showing so far to be very effective. And when you only have one parent in the home, it's really hard to do everything else and then help with homework. And so this becomes a very important tool for them. It's been funded by the Department of Defense. There is Spanish language help in some of the areas also. Very important. Please tell people about it. We've already had about 14,771 users last school year, and we expect that to grow, especially when you go out and tell your 4 people. Really quickly to wrap up, the next slide, support to geographically dispersed. We've been hearing a lot of those programs throughout the day to include backpack journalism, but we do have something called Operation Military Child Care. If you are in a deployed status reservist, we go out into your communities and we look for child care centers that are accredited, or we help them get accredited, and we buy down the fees so that you can have something comparable that if you were on Fort Hood or Fort Bragg, and as well as having the free deployment respite care. Next slide. Oh, Operation Give a Hug. Okay. I think many of you know about this. This has been a fantastic symbol, but beyond that, it has given great comfort to many of our children. I also wanted to say there's kind of been a rumor that that's going away and it's not being funded, and that's not true. I think if you even saw a recent CNN story when a daddy warrior deploys, the 11-year-old and the 14-year-old, they never talked about Give a Hug, but the entire time that they were being interviewed, those 2 little girls were clutching their Give a Hug doll. And so I just wanted to let you know we still have those available. So what's the way ahead? Next slide. Clearly, we expand our qualitative and quantitative research because it's important to get that longitudinal study that we see what happens cumulatively over time. Clearly, we are going to continue to update and revise our policies and our programs and services to be informed by this. We're going to continue to standardize our child and youth programs so that when the children and you go from post to post, you don't have to figure it all out again. So we're continuing to work on that. As I saw yesterday, you don't think we're quite there yet, so we have a lot of work in that area. And we need to increase the availability of these programs for our geographically dispersed. And we certainly need to improve the communication and marketing. I mean, the fact that a third or two-thirds of you hadn't heard of some of these programs, and I consider you to be some of the most informed people on our installations, truly, because of the leadership positions that you hold, shows we still have to just push it out there. As I know, though, the really good stuff, word of mouth, is the best marketing, and so we'll know when we're doing a really good job. Word of mouth is very good, but we're taking that very seriously. And the last slide just talks about a couple of ongoing long-term studies. MSEC is we're partnered with MSEC right now, and they're studying the effects of multiple deployments on military students, homeschooling support, as well as secondary transitions and enrichment for gifted children. So we're trying to focus in on many parts of our constituency. And we also have another one with the University of Georgia on long-term impacts. So we are a learning organization, and we'll continue to partner with our academic friends to inform our studies, and we will continue to ask you, from your perspective, what's working and what's not, and we value that. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. We have time for maybe 2 questions, and as we did yesterday, I'm going to take 1 question from this room and 1 question from the other room. We have a lady way in the back of the room, back in the right corner, who popped up right away. Back there.
Yes, I just heard about the child care centers and how the women can have their children there. Oh, excuse me, I'm a retiree, but I used to budget for a lot of these programs for the Community and Family Support Center. And I'm still, like Michelle Obama, very interested in our military families. A lot of the women have told me that even with the reduced costs at the post child care centers, they still cannot afford to pay what they ask, and especially when they have more than 1 child. I just heard from Rick that $800 million is budgeted for the child care centers. But isn't there some kind of relief for the low-income people so that they can get their children there at reduced fare?
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Our child and youth fees are based upon total family income. And so we do have fees at the very lowest end, and then they go all the way, you know, to, I think we just changed our fee structure that we have 9 categories, and there are also multiple family discounts. Now, what I would like to say, we believe that our fees are very competitive with outside the gate, and there are also provisions for if you're in an area, say like in Hinesville, Georgia, and it's less expensive outside the gate, you're in a lower